From a young age, Stephen Kaufman's parents noticed something different about him. Stephen didn't understand instructions right away. He forgot simple things. He didn't catch on as quickly as his siblings. By age 8, they took young Stephen Kaufman to a psychologist. They gave him an IQ test. His score came back, he had an 87. That would determine his schooling. He was kept back a grade. He was moved to the special education department. Another IQ was taken at age 11, a same result. In addition to the classes, which Stephen found boring, was the socialization. More than once, Stephen remembers being made fun of. At one point, schoolmates took him to the bathroom. They forced his head into the sink and they doused him with cold water as a punishment for being a special ed student. The course of Stephen's life continued this way as he went through high school. Until one day, on an average day, it was an average day in an average classroom, Stephen flagged down his teacher during a time of quiet study in the book. And he said, "Hey, I'm bored. Can you help me?" His teacher, not knowing Stephen very well, asked him to wait a moment so she could get his file and read up about it. And she noticed something. His teacher noticed what had eluded so many other teachers and authority figures in his life for so long. And this teacher came over to Stephen and she said, "Yeah, I've observed you in my class these past few weeks, and I've observed that you certainly do look bored." As this teacher, this patient teacher, continued with Stephen, and she ended the conversation by saying this: "I think the reason you're bored is not because you're unintelligent, but quite the opposite. It's because you are immensely gifted and you're actually very smart." Stephen Kaufman says this was the moment in which a light bulb went off for him. Pieces fell together, a veil was lifted. For the first time in his life, Stephen Kaufman says, somebody heard him. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone believed in him. And for the first time in his life, he felt he could break out of the cell which had been built for him and do anything. Someone had finally seen him. So Stephen Kaufman started to bloom. He went on auditions for plays. He tried out for sports. He joined the choir. He initiated conversations. He blossomed into the person he had somehow hoped he could always be. He got into Carnegie Mellon University on an opera scholarship. He did graduate work at Cambridge University in England and received his PhD, and you'll never guess what he studied. He did some really important research into the ways that standardized testing can be wrong. All of these accomplishments coming in no small measure as a result of someone saying something to him, someone seeing something in him, someone believing in him. Friends, this is where today's gospel takes you and me this morning. God sees something in you. So God does something for you. And God asks us to then do something for others. Yes, God sees something in you just as he saw something in those 10 lepers. If you look at your bulletin covers, did y'all get a bulletin? Take a look at the image on the front. Looks like a rather primitive chapel. It's actually an old Roman cistern. It's in the small town of Israel. We were there in January, called Birken. And Birken is about 90 minutes outside of Jerusalem. And according to our gospel lesson, it is, quote, in the region between Samaria and Galilee. Yes, what you're looking at is the cave where the 10 lepers in our story lived. This is the cave to which they were annexed, far from family, far from friends and community, as untouchables with leprosy. This is the cave, tradition has it, from which 10 lepers 2,000 years ago called out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." So this, friends, is where Jesus stopped. This is where Jesus saw something in them. This is where Jesus did not pass by and consider these lepers, as society did, as unworthy to be in contact with others. Now, Jesus saw them as invaluable humans, who had families and friends and jobs and hobbies. So much so that this may have been what distracted them from coming back to Jesus to say thanks, which Jesus did not hold against them. The text doesn't say that the lepers got sick again, those 9 lepers, for we do not serve a vindictive God. Always surprised me about Jesus' life. I don't know if this has ever surprised you about Jesus, but he didn't spend it in royal mansions. He didn't spend it among famous people. He didn't spend it doing exotic things. I wonder how Instagram worthy his life would have been back then. Jesus lived his life among average people, often those suffering, hurting, and living on the margins. This band of ostracized, hurting outcasts, that's what caught Jesus' attention. And I don't know if you're like me, but you read this and you're like, who am I supposed to be paying attention to? Who's on the margins? Who's in the special ed program? Who's being written off by society? Is today God asking you to pay attention to the Miss Dumpty-Dump, to the person people are walking right by? Time and time again, Jesus' message was that God hears your cry. You are not too small to go unnoticed. Friends, here's the tweet this morning. Your tiny problem is God's big concern. Your tiny problem is God's big concern. You are worth more than you know. You are invaluable in God's sight. And this is a message whose importance has not died down. I wonder if you're feeling like nobody sees you this morning. Given the uptick in loneliness and anxiety in these COVID years they brought to all of us, I'm wondering if you have a small view of yourself. And if we all need to remind ourselves of how God sees us. Malcolm Forbes put it wonderfully, that we all tend to think more highly of other people and think less of ourselves. And if we all need to remind ourselves of that God sees each of us as invaluable contributors to the mission of hope Jesus was sent on, that you and I play irreplaceable roles in the lives of family and partners and siblings and children and grandchildren, roles that nobody else can play but us. This is how God sees us. A Catholic missionary working with the Maasai people in Tanzania years ago, he asked a local pagan chief, hey, can you show me where God lives? This Maasai tribal leader took the missionary to the top of a very high peak. There, they waited for the clouds to part. And then the tribal chief pointed to the farthest, most remote part of the sky that they could see. There, he said, that's where God lives. This missionary was quick to tell him that that's not how Christianity sees things. God is not far off. God does not dwell remotely, nor is God uninterested. My friend Bob, who works at an auto parts manufacturing facility, told me how productivity had doubled after the boss put in surveillance cameras to keep an eye on the workers. I wonder how you and I might speak to one another, treat one another, interact with one another if we were conscious of God's presence, just as conscious as those workers are of those surveillance cameras. Of course, not in a creepy or judgmental way, but if we were somehow made aware that God's watching us out of care and out of love. God sees you. God sees something in you. We're not alone. We're not unknown. We are seen by God, who also wants to do something for us. A friend of mine visited Sam's Club recently, decided to get a hot dog. One of those hot dogs you walk out of the store, they got hot dog, Coke, chip special going on. Don't act like you've never seen it before. Yeah, a lot of you guys spent $1.50, I can tell. Piping hot, waiting for you after that long shopping trip. Come eat me. Deliver us from temptation, Lord. Well, as my friend stood in line, a man presumably impaired in some way came driving up in one of those mobility scooters. And seeing that nobody would give him, it was a long line, nobody would give him cuts. My friend was in the back of the line, and he starts up a conversation with this guy in a mobility scooter. And my friend learns that the guy on the scooter, he's also in line for the hot dog special. So my friend says, hey, you go find a table. It's kind of crowded in here. I'll get the hot dog. So he gets the hot dogs and brings it to the table. And the guy in the scooter was so excited, and he behaved as if my friend had just brought him a winning lottery ticket. And he was overjoyed that my friend actually paid for it and wouldn't accept reimbursement. My friend saw someone no one else did. And he did something nobody else did. And the beauty thing about this story, my friend says years ago, before he started taking his faith seriously, going to church, opening the gospel to himself, he would never have done that. That he too would have been just another guy in line, not paying attention to the guy in the scooter. That, my friends, is what Jesus meant to him. That's how Jesus touched the man in the scooter. That's how Jesus makes us like himself, someone who sees us and does something for us. And God asks us then to do something for someone else. Acts of service, of course, are what readily come to mind in this wonderful community here, where we will say it at our dismissal, right? Worship, outreach, and love for all. We reach out, we have love for all. Acts of service are at the heart of Jesus' ministry, who not only healed, but fed and even raised the dead. But Jesus did something else, something even bigger. Jesus embodied the gospel. Here's what I mean. The good news, which is much greater than any act of service. After all, the churches, we're not a social service agency primarily. I know we have a pantry. I know we do a lot of social service stuff. But we're a mission organization. And the people who founded this church, they put that window in there. And they said, go ye into all the world. And to finish that sentence, it's going off into the world to preach the good news, the gospel. And the gospel, more than anything else, friends, is a gospel of hope. It's a gospel of hope. How many of you are just kind of coming here after being around a lot of apathy out there? Oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I don't know if I can say hell, I'm sorry, I'll find out later. But I mean, we hear that, you know, it's just like, so there's, you know, the economy is going down the tank, or the democracy is going to lose. I mean, all this negative. And the gospel, what makes it different than any other religion out there, this is a religion of hope, friends. Jesus came as hope for the world. And that's what dwells in each one of our hearts. And that's what we're asked to embody as ministers of the gospel. Father Vincent Donovan, I read a book by him this week, and he says this: the message of the gospel and the basis for its urgency is to put all things under the dominion of Christ. The human race, the destiny of the human race, of all creation, is what is at stake. Personnel salvation, personal healing is a secondary question. The recapitulation of all things in Christ is what is in store for the human race. I think a famous Jesuit, Teilhard de Chardin, talked about the Omega point, and that is that all of history is headed towards Christ, towards love, towards the essence of God. God intends to bring the earth and the human race into the fulfillment of the kingdom planned from the beginning of creation. Remember, in the beginning was the Word. And the recapitulation of all things, all humans, all nations, the earth, the man Jesus, and the Word made flesh at the end. The nations and the cultures of the world, with all the riches they imply and possess, are not destined to be saved or conserved. They're called to be lifted up and fulfilled in service and transformed into Christ. That's our future, folks. It's one of great hope. Our job is to be bearers of this hope, witnesses of this message, conduits to an apathetic, discouraged, and anxious world, to be heralds of the good news that God has a plan. I tell you, I am so excited that God has a plan, because that's the plan I want. Friends, God sees something in you this morning. So God does something for you. I wonder if you could think of something God did for you this week. Just one thing, the many things. Beautiful fall out there. Michigan won. Yeah. And God asks us then to do something for others. What's that look like in your life? And that is to be the gospel, to tell others about the gospel, and to share the gospel. Now, I'm going to share something with you which is a personal shortcut. And I hope you'll have patience with me. But as some of you know, this past week was my 15th year of ministry with you. I didn't do that to clap, but can we take a special collection after this hot tub? But one of the things I noticed in my 15th year, and this is the personal shortcoming I want to share with you, is that this is the first year I've been your rector, and I haven't done a baptism. I haven't done one baptism. And I had to just stop and say, God, what does that mean in my life and in the life of this community? Why is it important? It's because baptisms are an indicator of how well the gospel is being shared. And as your pastor, your leader, I had to stop and really think about this. And am I leading by example? Unfortunately, many of the examples of evangelism that the church has, I would say most of them, have been corrupted by bad theology. Just that word, evangelical, it carries so much negative weight in our society. And I wanted to distance myself from that. But how do you distance yourself from that, but not Jesus? And not salvation, and not what Jesus intended when he said, here's the good news, go out and share it. People tend to think of evangelicals who are not universally looked up to and respected in our society, but I'm just not going to go there. What I'm going to share with you is that I had 2 separate conversations this week with people whom I know and I really like and respect, who are not professed Christians, but they've expressed to me a desire to learn about the Christian faith. So I'm undertaking with them a course of study, declaring at the outset that I'm not bringing God to them, that I understand that God's already with us all. I mean, it's the God we talk about, right? The one God. God's already present in our world, and that the God who has been known in the dark can more completely be known in the light of Christ. And so they have agreed to undertake a course of study with me in which I will share with them all that I know about Christianity. My models for evangelism are broken. And so I'm trying to make a new one up. And I want you to help me. What curriculum am I going to use? What book am I going to refer to? Believe me, you guys have been in my office. I got a lot of books. But I haven't seen one that's going to work with us because Jesus is real to me. And I need to convey that in a way that's not surrounded by academia or jargon that has all kinds of misleading ways to understand it. So it dawned upon me that I've been a Christian like nearly all my life. And if I can't explain the faith as it's impacted me with some completeness or efficacy, then I haven't really been paying attention. So there's only a vague outline before us and these 2 kind of parties who I'm going to be meeting with in the next little while. And at the end of our time of study, the question will be posed. I've told you all about Christianity as I understand it. And would you like to accept it and become a Christian, be baptized or not? Without judgments and without any sort of change in my love for them. I don't quote Billy Graham a lot, but one quote I really like is he says, God's job is to judge. Spirit's job is to convict. Our job is to love. And our job is to love everybody, especially those with whom we disagree, right? We are to love our enemies. That's a sign of how deep your Christianity is. Do you speak well of those that you really don't agree with? Right? Those are mature Christians, right? Without judgments, without any sort of change in my love for them, I will have done my job in presenting the gospel, what Jesus has asked us all to do for others, for God sees us. God does something for us. And God gives us the chance to return the favor and do something for others. And so my question for you is about the people around you. Is there somebody around you who's curious about the Christian faith? I mean, I grew up as a Catholic, and it was just kind of assumed that you knew all of Christianity just by going to church and going to schools. And it really wasn't until somebody pulled me aside and kind of unpacked Christianity where I could say, oh, okay, I get this. And I wonder if that's not true for a lot of us. And if that's happened in your life, that's fantastic. Or maybe you have some rudimentary questions about that. Is there someone you are being asked to explain this Christian thing to explain Jesus to? I think St. David's is here, not just as a place for us to worship and to reach out in service and love, for you all embody love for your neighbors. But I think it's a place to learn more about Jesus and to help equip us to share Christ with others. So in a few weeks, we're going to start on October 30th at our 9 o'clock class. So the class that precedes this one is after the 8 o'clock service. And this class is called Sharing Faith. And I'd like to invite you, especially if you have someone around you who's curious about Christianity, you don't feel like you have the vocabulary or you know how to approach it. And this one friend of mine in California, she asked me about Jesus almost a year ago. And I just kind of pushed hold, right? I finally called her back this week and I said, I finally think I have a way to do this so that our friendship is covered with love, and yet I can give you the information that you want. If you have someone around you who's curious about Christianity, or maybe you are, I'll be teaching you step by step ways that I have found helpful to share the faith with others. And I hope you'll come in and add your experience, add your knowledge, and that we can make this something in which we all grow in ways that help us follow that sign. Go ye into the world, not just with food, not just with a place to stay, but also with this gospel. Because I don't know about you, but I say at least once a week, how do people get by without Jesus? Right? How do people make it work? Right? There's something to this gospel. God sees us. God does something for us. And now, my brothers and sisters, let us more fully do something with others.